On our wedding day, my wife whispered, "I love you," but as I turned to kiss her, I caught her glancing at my brother and smiling. The day was perfect. The sun cast a golden glow over the garden venue, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and soft classical music. Rows of white chairs lined the path leading to the altar, where I stood, waiting for the woman I loved. Emily. She was everything I had ever wanted: kind, intelligent, breathtakingly beautiful. I had spent years convincing myself that I didn't deserve someone like her, that she was too good to be real. But today, she was walking toward me in a flowing white dress, her smile radiant. Her eyes locked on mine. As she reached me, I felt my breath catch in my throat. The moment was surreal, as if I had stepped into a dream I never wanted to wake up from. Daniel, my older brother and best man, stood beside me, giving me an encouraging nod. He was always the one people gravitated toward, the confident, charismatic older sibling who seemed to excel at everything. But today, for once, I was the one at the center of attention. The officiant began speaking, though I barely heard a word. My entire world had shrunk to the woman in front of me. Emily's vows were perfect. She spoke about how she had never believed in love until she met me, how I made her feel safe, cherished. I struggled to keep my emotions in check as I recited my own vows, promising to love and honor her for the rest of my life. Then, the moment came. "You may now kiss the bride." I turned to Emily, and she leaned in close, whispering, "I love you." But before our lips met, I saw it, just for a fraction of a second. Emily's eyes flickered away from me, toward Daniel, and she smiled. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just any smile. It was a secret, knowing smile. A smile that held something unspoken, something I wasn't meant to see. My heart, which had been beating wildly with joy just moments ago, faltered. My mind screamed at me to ignore it, to brush it off as nothing, just a random glance, a coincidence. But deep inside, I knew better. I kissed her anyway. The cheers of the crowd surrounded us. And Emily wrapped her arms around me, pressing herself against me as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just smiled at my brother in a way that sent my entire world tilting on its axis. I forced myself to push it aside. This was my wedding day, the happiest day of my life. It had to be. The reception was a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and endless congratulations. I should have been caught up in the joy of it all, but my mind kept replaying that moment over and over again. That smile. Emily looked stunning. Her dress hugging her curves perfectly as she twirled on the dance floor, her laughter ringing out like music. She was mine now. We were husband and wife. So why did I feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff? I tried to focus on the celebration, on our guests, on the speeches being made in our honor. But no matter where I looked, my eyes kept finding Emily and Daniel. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice. But I did. The way her laughter was just a little too bright when he spoke. The way he leaned in close when he whispered something in her ear. The way her fingers brushed his arm absent-mindedly. I downed my drink, trying to shake off the unease settling in my stomach. I was imagining things. I had to be. Emily and Daniel had always gotten along well, but there had never been anything between them. At least, not that I had ever noticed. "Relax, man." Daniel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, grinning. "You look like you're about to pass out." I forced a laugh, just taking it all in. "Don't overthink it," he said, raising his glass to me. "You married an incredible woman. Enjoy it." I nodded, but my stomach twisted at his words. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I could trust him. Later that night, as the party began to wind down, I finally had a moment alone with Emily. We stood on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The cool night air a welcome relief from the warmth of the crowded reception hall. She leaned against the railing, her wedding dress glowing under the moonlight, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights below. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that I was overthinking, that I was just letting stress cloud my judgment. But I needed to know. I stepped closer, sliding my arms around her waist. "You looked beautiful today," I murmured, my lips brushing against her temple. She smiled, tilting her head up to look at me. "And you, my love, looked incredibly handsome." I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You and Daniel, you seem close today." Emily blinked, then laughed softly. "Of course. He's your brother. And my brother-in-law now." My chest tightened. "Yeah, it's just, I saw you look at him, right before we kissed." Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't show a hint of nervousness. Instead, she tilted her head, her smile soft and patient. "I was just happy, James," she said gently. "Happy to be marrying you. Happy to be surrounded by family. You're reading too much into things." Maybe I was. Maybe the stress of the wedding, the overwhelming emotions, were making me paranoid. But something in her voice, something about the way she said it, didn't sit right with me. She pulled me into a slow, lingering kiss, and for a moment, I let myself believe her. Let myself believe that I was imagining it all, that everything was perfect, that I hadn't just glimpsed the first crack in the foundation of my marriage. Because if I admitted that something was wrong, I'd have to face the terrifying possibility that my perfect life was nothing more than a beautiful illusion. For the next few weeks, I convinced myself it was nothing. I had to. Emily and I were newlyweds. We were supposed to be basking in the glow of our fresh start together, not dwelling on a single fleeting moment from the wedding. I told myself it was paranoia, wedding day nerves, maybe even insecurity. After all, Daniel had always been the more outgoing, charming one between the two of us. It wasn't unusual for people to be drawn to him. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with little things. Emily, who used to be so affectionate with me, suddenly seemed distracted. It wasn't obvious, nothing I could pinpoint exactly, but I felt it. A shift in her energy. The way her mind always seemed to be somewhere else. At night, when we lay in bed together, she'd turn away before falling asleep, her body curled just out of reach. When I pulled her close, she didn't resist, but she didn't melt into me the way she used to either. Then there were the text messages. Emily was never one to hide her phone from me before. But now, I noticed how quickly she'd flip it over when I walked into the room. How she'd laugh softly at something on the screen and then lock it before I could get a glimpse. I told myself not to snoop. That wasn't the kind of husband I wanted to be. But the doubt was growing. And then came the moment that set everything in motion. We had been invited to my parents' house for dinner. A casual Sunday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. My mom loved having us over, and it was something we had done even before getting married. Emily had always been close with my parents, especially my mom. She had this way of making people adore her, her warmth, her kindness, the way she made you feel like you were the only person in the room when she spoke to you. But that night, as we sat around the dining table, I couldn't focus on the conversation because I was watching her, and I was watching Daniel, the subtle way they interacted, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought no one was looking, the way she would laugh at something he said, touching his wrist absent-mindedly as if it were second nature. Daniel leaned in toward Emily and whispered something just low enough that I couldn't hear. And she blushed. Blushed. My wife. My hands tightened around my fork, and I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. Don't make a scene. Not here. Not now. But my heart was pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? That night, after we got home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. As soon as we stepped through the front door, I turned to her. "What's going on between you and Daniel?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I saw the way you looked at him tonight. The way you laughed, the way you touched him." My voice was steady, but inside, I was boiling. Emily let out a small, incredulous laugh. "James, you're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I stepped closer, searching her face for any sign of guilt. Because I know what I saw. Her expression hardened. "He's your brother. And my brother-in-law now. Of course we're close. That's not what I mean. And you know it." She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "So what are you saying? That I'm having an affair?" The word hung between us like a dagger. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe it wasn't possible. But I didn't answer. That silence, it said everything. Emily's eyes darkened, her face unreadable. Then she let out a sharp breath and shook her head. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you don't trust me." I swallowed hard. "I want to trust you." She took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. "Then do it." I held her gaze for a long moment, searching for something, anything, that would make me believe her. Finally, I nodded. "Okay." But the doubt had already taken root, and I wasn't going to ignore it. The next morning, I woke up early, long before Emily. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of suspicion and guilt. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I reached over to her nightstand and picked up her phone. I hesitated. This wasn't me, but I needed to know. My fingers moved quickly, navigating through her messages. Most of them were normal texts from friends, from work, from my mom. But then I saw his name. Daniel. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. Most of the messages had been deleted, but a few remained. Daniel, can't stop thinking about last night. When can we talk? Emily, not now. It's too risky. Daniel, you know I hate hiding this from him. Emily, we don't have a choice. I felt like the floor had just disappeared beneath me. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't paranoia. It was real. I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My stomach twisted into knots, nausea creeping up my throat. I needed air. I needed to get the hell out of there before I woke her up and did something I'd regret. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and walked out of the house. My heart beat a deafening roar in my ears. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to breathe. I ended up at a small coffee shop down the street, staring blankly at a cup of black coffee I had no intention of drinking. My mind raced through every possibility, every scenario. How long had this been going on? Had it started before the wedding? Before the engagement? Before me? Had I been nothing more than a fool? A convenient placeholder while they played their little game behind my back? I thought about my brother, about how we had grown up together, how he had always been the golden child, the one people adored. And now? Now he had taken the one person who was supposed to be mine. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. I sat in that coffee shop for what felt like hours, the weight of the messages pressing down on me like a boulder crushing my chest. My wife. My brother. The two people I should trust the most. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over Daniel's contact. Part of me wanted to call him, to demand the truth, to hear him stumble through his pathetic excuses. But I knew what would happen. He'd lie. He'd act outraged, try to gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. No, I needed proof. Undeniable proof. I wasn't going to confront them until I had every piece of evidence I needed. When I finally returned home, Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made coffee. She turned and smiled when she saw me. Morning, love. You went out early. I forced a smile. Couldn't sleep. Everything okay? She searched my face, her expression unreadable. Was she looking for cracks? Trying to see if I knew? Yeah, I lied. Just needed some air. She nodded, handing me a cup of coffee. I was thinking we could have a lazy day today. Just the two of us. A perfect wife. A perfect lie. I took the cup from her, my stomach twisting at the thought of how easily she could pretend. She had lied to me for God knows how long. Slept beside me every night, knowing she was betraying me with my own brother. I didn't know who she was anymore, but I smiled. I played along, because I needed more time. That night, when Emily fell asleep beside me, I slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone again. I knew she had deleted most of her messages with Daniel, but I also knew something else. People are careless. They leave traces behind. I opened her email, and there it was. A hotel booking, under her name. A suite reserved for a business trip last month. I checked the date. My stomach lurched. I had been away that weekend for a work retreat. I had called her, asked how she was doing. She had told me she missed me, that she was curled up in bed, watching our favorite show. Daniel, shirtless, in a hotel room. My world shattered. The proof was right there in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I started digging deeper. The next morning, I went to the hotel from the reservation email. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I had to try. At first, the receptionist was hesitant to give me any information. But when I told her I was checking on my wife's last visit, pretending I had forgotten something in the room, she finally relented. She pulled up the records. Emily had checked in, my mind racing with what to do next. I thought about confronting Emily first, throwing the evidence in her face, demanding to know how she could do this to me. But then I realized something. Daniel. He had done this just as much as she had, and he needed to face the consequences too. So I drove to his apartment. When I knocked on his door, it took him a moment to answer. When he did, he looked surprised to see me. James, he said with a grin. What's up? I stared at him. How easy it was for him to smile at me, to act like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't sleeping with my wife. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice steady. Yeah? About what? I didn't answer. I pushed past him, stepping into his apartment. He raised an eyebrow but didn't stop me. All right, man. What's going on? I turned to face him. You tell me, I said coldly. When were you planning on telling me? His grin faltered. What? I pulled out my phone, opened the photo, and held it up. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. James, come on, he said, shaking his head. You're overreacting. I clenched my jaw. Overreacting. She came onto me, he said casually. I didn't plan for this to happen. But you know how she is. She's always been a little restless. I felt something snap inside me. I lunged at him, shoving him hard against the wall. He grunted as I pinned him, my hands gripping his shirt. You think this is a joke? I hissed. Look, man. She's my wife. He shoved me back, his smirk vanishing. And what do you want me to say, James? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. It was so hollow, so empty, that it made my blood boil. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to break his nose. To make him feel just a fraction of the pain he had put me through. But I didn't, because I had something better planned. I stepped back, breathing heavily. You'll be sorry, I said. Just wait. And then I walked out. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed in a hotel, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how to destroy them both. Emily had betrayed me. Daniel had betrayed me. And they were about to learn exactly what that felt like. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to end them. But not yet. Not until I made sure they lost everything. I woke up the next morning with a plan. The past few weeks had been a slow descent into hell, but today, I finally saw the way out. I wasn't going to wallow in anger, drowning in the betrayal of my wife and my brother. No, I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. Not with fists, not with screaming, with consequences. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I wanted a divorce, and I wanted it on my terms. I had gathered more than enough proof, screenshots of the messages, the hotel receipts, even the damning photo of Daniel in that room. There was no way Emily could fight this. Given the circumstances, my lawyer said, flipping through the evidence, you'll have the upper hand in court, especially if there are assets involved. That was exactly what I needed to hear. I had been the one to buy our house, the one to set up our savings. If Emily thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she had another thing coming. But the divorce? That was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. That evening, I sent out a group message to my entire family. James, family dinner at Mom and Dad's place tomorrow. I have something important to share. I made sure Daniel and Emily were included in the text. Emily called me almost immediately. What's going on? She asked, her voice cautious. You'll see tomorrow, I said flatly and hung up. I wanted her nervous. I wanted her squirming. She had no idea what was coming. The next day, I arrived at my parents' house early. My mom greeted me with a warm hug, but she frowned when she saw my expression. James, is everything okay? Not yet, I admitted. But it will be. Slowly, the rest of the family arrived, my cousins, aunts, uncles. Finally, Daniel walked in, acting as if nothing was wrong. Emily came in a few minutes later. The moment she stepped inside, she looked at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, fear. She knew. She didn't know how much. But she knew enough to be scared. Good. Once everyone was settled at the dining table, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I asked everyone to come tonight because I need to share something, I began. Something that affects me. And the family. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daniel's smirk was gone now. His body stiff. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad. My voice was steady. Daniel has been sleeping with my wife. The room fell into complete silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. Then my mother let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth in shock. My father's face turned pale, then red with anger. What? He said, his voice dangerously low. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I have proof, I said. Messages. Photos. Hotel receipts. Everyone turned to Daniel. He swallowed hard, then scoffed. This is ridiculous. Is it? But I've seen enough to know the truth. And now, so do you. My father stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. He turned to Daniel, shaking with fury. Tell me this isn't true. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. He had no defense. The silence was his confession. My mother let out a strangled sob, her eyes filled with heartbreak. How could you? She whispered, looking at Daniel like he was a stranger. Then, she turned to Emily. And you, she hissed. We welcomed you into this family. We treated you like a daughter. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. I never meant for this to happen, Al. I laughed coldly. Oh, you never meant for it to happen? I repeated. What part, Emily? The hotel rooms? The secret texts? The sneaking around while I was gone? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Daniel suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up. Enough, he muttered. This is getting blown out of proportion. My father turned to him, his face unreadable. Blown out of proportion, he repeated, his voice eerily calm. Then, with no warning, he reached out and slapped Daniel across the face. The sound echoed in the silent room. Everyone froze. Daniel staggered back, his hand flying to his cheek in shock. My father took a deep breath, his fist clenched. You are no longer my son, he said. The weight of those words crashed down on Daniel like a hammer. His mouth fell open, his eyes wide. Dad, don't, my father snapped. Don't call me that. I don't have a son who would betray his own brother. Daniel looked around, searching for support, but there was none. Even our relatives, who had always adored him, looked at him with disgust. You are a disgrace, my mother whispered, shaking her head. Daniel turned to me then, his face twisted with anger. You happy now? He spat. You've turned everyone against me. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. You did that yourself. Emily was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. I didn't care. I'm filing for divorce, I announced. And Emily? You're getting nothing. She looked up, stunned. What? I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. My lawyer already drafted the papers. You'll see that, thanks to the evidence I collected, you won't be getting a cent from me. Her face crumbled. James, please, don't do this. I smiled. Oh, no. We're done. You made sure of that. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Then, I turned back to Daniel. And as for you? I said. I hope she was worth it. He stared at me, seething. You think you won? He sneered. I tilted my head. I didn't have to win, Daniel. I just had to make sure you lost. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. But he had nothing left to say. The damage was done. And I was done with both of them. As I walked out of that house, leaving behind the wreckage of the life I had once built, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The betrayal had nearly broken me, but I had survived, and I had made sure they would never forget what they had done. I wasn't the fool anymore. I was free. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking Reddit cheating stories happening around you.